another Silverbird Selection video. I've just recently completed my 20th game review from this series, that was Fighter Pilot. So it's now time to take a look at the last 10 games I've reviewed and compare those reviews to the reviews from ZZap64 and also the Lemon64 user ratings. So let's head over to my computer and do that right now. So here we are, this is my spreadsheet, which you'll be familiar with from the previous videos if you've watched them. I've filtered it down to the list of 10 games, the last 10 games that I reviewed, and you can see on the right hand side we've got all the scores, the individual scores for the different categories, and also the total score. That's what I'm going to be comparing to the Zap scores. So we'll do them in order, the order I did the review. So the first one I reviewed was pneumatic hammers. We'll head over to Lemon64. I've already got it up on the screen actually. So as before, we've got the Lemon reviews on the right hand side there, and their score was 6 out of 10 overall. Zap, you can see, gave it 58%. Let's take a look at the review. So as you can see, this issue is from March 1987, issue 23, black and white page, and they gave it a full page review. I'm not going to go too much into the depth of the review. Just like last time, I'm going to be looking at the reviewer comments more than the actual detail of the review. Generally, the main body of the review tends to just be a description of what the game is and how you play it. There's not really much actual review there. The reviews are in the boxes done by the different reviewers. So let's quickly look at the overall then. They gave it presentation 68%, graphics 67%, sound 49%. I think they're fairly similar scores to what I gave. Their sort of gameplay scores, they split it into hookability and lastability and value at this point, all of which are in the 60% sort of area, and they gave it an overall score of 58%, an original and mildly entertaining piece of budget software. That's a much higher rating than I gave it. I gave it 4.5 out of 10. I didn't enjoy it at all. It was very dull. But some of the things we would agree on between myself and Zap is things like gathering up the required number of nuggets is a tedious and repetitive process, although fairly absorbing at first. Well, I wouldn't really say it was absorbing, but I agree with the rest of it. But if the to and froing wasn't bad enough, some tasks are very awkward and the computer is fussy about the precise positioning of the hand cursor. Now that was the main criticism I had of the game as well. It's very fiddly and as a result very boring and tedious to progress through the game. And the other comments are much the same. There isn't much to it. What's there is very tedious. After playing for an hour or so, I quickly lost interest. I'm impressed they played for an hour actually. And the final review there from Julian Rignall. This is a completely original game which plops nicely into the mainstream of the budget game river. The backdrops are very pretty, ruined by chunky sprites that wobble in the foreground. The program is a bit fussy when it comes to changing tools, and you have to position the hand over the correct pixel if you want to pick up or drop something. So yeah, they all pretty much said the same thing, although they gave it a much higher score overall than I gave it. So that's pneumatic hammers. Looking at the Lemon user comments, there's only 7 of them, and they range from people asking how the hell you play the game to one person who's given a very detailed description of exactly what you have to do. So let's move on to the next game, which was N Wrestle. So I gave this a score of 7.1, and the Lemon score pretty similar to that, 7.4. Quite a lot of comments here, 24 comments, lots of people saying how much they enjoyed the game. But the Zap review is a little bit of a different story. Once again, this is from April 86, issue 12, black and white page. Got a nice screenshot of the game there. This is a review of the full price version rather than the budget version, so I guess you have to take that into consideration, that they don't see it as being quite good, as good value for money. But they gave it 53% overall, not very good value for money, as I was just saying. Graphics and sound, I think they're very harsh with the graphics, 42%. I think at this point in time, 1986, they were reasonable enough graphics, a bit chunky. Like they do say that they're porky and blocky and poorly animated. I don't think it's fair to say that they're poorly animated. Other scores are quite similar to what I gave it. But yeah, generally they're quite disappointed with this. They're expecting something akin to Way of the Exploding Fist. They think the graphics are awful and the gameplay is incongruous and confused, apparently. So yeah, some of those criticisms may be a little bit valid. Sometimes it's a little bit fiddly to get the moves done, and the fact that it's very easy to get pinned, that's very true. They're quite long reviews here, which I haven't read thoroughly, but generally speaking, they weren't impressed with the game. There, the tune played throughout the game is the sonic equivalent of the graphics, i.e. awful, and the sound effects are even worse. I think that's really harsh. I think the graphics are pretty decent and the music was pretty good too. So yeah, quite a difference of opinion there between myself and Zap, and also Lemon are more on my side than theirs. So there we have it. So let's move on to the next review I did, which was Street Warriors, which I gave a score of 5.3. And the Lemon score very similar, 4.6, sort of around the 5 sort of range. Only a few comments, and they're pretty much saying, well, there's only one reasonable comment, which is a pretty awful beat 'em up. You only have 2 moves at your disposal and you can only hit enemies from the left. I'm not sure that's actually true, and enemies get stuck in the background, but yeah, so I pretty much agree with that. Unfortunately, there is no Zap review for this one. They never reviewed it. I've checked, there's no other magazine reviews I could find either, so that's the end of that really. Myself and Lemon in pretty much agreement that it was a very average game. So let's move on to the next one quickly, which was Thrust, which certainly isn't considered an average game. So looking on Lemon, they've given it a score of 8.1. We'll look at the Zap review in a second. Let's just scroll down a few of the comments. Lots of comments here, 38 comments. Special game and no mistake. Amazing game. Best budget game ever made. I think I dispute that slightly. Very difficult but addictive. So yeah, pretty much similar comments to what I'd think about it. Their rating's a little bit higher than mine, which was 7.2. But that was more because of the graphics and sound sort of bringing the score down slightly rather than the gameplay aspects. So let's take a look at the Zap review. And as you can see, they've given this a sizzler in issue 13, May 1986, a 2-page review in full colour, and they gave it 94%. Which is quite a high rating for a budget game, I would say. Most enjoyable game we've played for ages, and at the price you'd be silly to miss it. Well, I totally agree with that. It's a very good game, and for £2 it's a bargain, and they've given it a value for money of 99%. I mean, really, that should be 100, shouldn't it? All the scores are pretty good. The graphics and sound a little bit lower, as I'd agree with the graphics. Fairly dated looking, but they actually do the job. And they're saying Rob Hubbard supplied the annoying main screen ditty, but the befitting FX make up for this. So they didn't like the Rob Hubbard tune, and I think that Hubbard tune is not one of his best, to be honest, although I know a lot of people do like it. So yeah, they've given it really good scores across the board. Let's have a look at the review comments. At last, a version of Gravitar which plays just as well as the original, although not being a totally faithful copy. Thrust has its own elements and comes up with one of the most addictive and playable arcade games I've played in a long while. Or time, he actually says there, sorry. GL, I think that's Gary Liddon, isn't it, has really gone to town with his review. It's filled 2 speech bubbles. Upon loading, I'm afraid that Thrust just looks hopelessly dated. Still, playing the game puts any reservations that the graphics may have aroused far into the back of your mind. Immensely playable. Let's just go back to the other comment here and have a look at that one. Thrust is a brilliant game and the best budget title I've seen. The Rob Hubbard soundtrack, however, is boring but does contain a few nice bits. Thankfully, it only makes an entrance on the title screen, which was actually one of my criticisms of it, is that it's only on the title screen and not in game. So there you go, slight difference of opinion. So yeah, they rated it very highly. I don't rate it quite as high as that, but it is still a good game. Next up, I reviewed UFO from 1986, and this is where you'll see a very significant difference of opinion. So my score was 6.1, which it did not deserve. That was again influenced by the fact that the graphics and sound were quite decent, and the presentation, the gameplay was not very good. So the lemon rating is probably more fair, 4.9 from 26 votes and a few comments. Nicely drawn backgrounds, however I think there were only 3 or 4 and this didn't hold much lastability once you'd seen them. Poor even at a few quid. So then we get onto the ZZap review from issue 27, and nice colour, sort of, I don't know, as a third of a page, with Barbarian just on the left there, and they did not like it at all. I mean, it's got a couple of nice screenshots there. If we go over some of the ratings here, I think they've been particularly harsh in a couple of cases. Mainly just the overall score I think is harsh, and this shows a sort of flaw, or a difference shall we say, in how ZZap did their reviews compared to how I do mine in terms of calculating the overall score, because clearly there's an overall score of 19% there. With the exception of lastability, none of the other scores are anywhere near that low, so this clearly isn't any kind of aggregation of the other scores, it's just a score that they arbitrarily throw at it. So looking at things like presentation, pretty similar to what I said. Graphics were very nice, sound was okay, and the gameplay scores were all pretty low, which is what I said as well. Gameplay not great, but it looked like a nice package. Unfortunately, just didn't deliver on the gameplay. Looking at the comments, and they sort of back up what we've just been saying. UFO looks quite nice, but the pretty graphics don't compensate for the lack of gameplay. As budget blasters go, UFO isn't exactly the cream of the crop. There's a fair amount of death and destruction for your money, but little else. It takes quite a while to finish any of the levels, and seeing the same, albeit very smart screens all the time proves too uninteresting to justify its purchase. I think that's fair enough. As I said, I gave it quite a high rating because of the graphics and things like that, but it wasn't worth a 6.1 rating. I didn't say it was worth the money. So yeah, but definitely a difference in the scores there in terms of the overall score. The game I reviewed next was another shoot 'em up, this time Warhawk, and I gave that a score of 7.8, which is the highest rating any game's been given so far. The lemon score is 7.3, so pretty similar. A few comments there. This person didn't like it. Boring shooter that makes you wonder why you don't just play one of the other games. Well, yeah, I suppose that's fair enough, but it does say okay at a budget price. Happy Monday says, this is so brilliant, I regularly play it even today. I even find the shooting making the melody disappear from the music great. Lots of fairly glowing comments about it. So moving on to the ZZap score, they gave it 80%. Full page review, black and white, but that's from September 86. And pretty similar scores to what I gave it. I think overall 80%, so very similar to my 7.8. Good value for money and gameplay scores. Sound, meaty Rob Hubbard soundtrack pounds away through the game. Spot effects and jingles are good too. Graphics are a little bit lower rated than everything else, which is what I said as well. And presentation's reasonably good as well. So pretty similar between myself and ZZap this time. So a couple of comments. This isn't at all bad, especially if you're a shoot 'em up fanatic who wants something reminiscent of the arcade game Star Force. The Rob Hubbard tune pounds away, adding a certain freneticism to the game. I'm not overly keen on this average Star Force clone. It features some of the weakest bas relief graphics I've seen on the C64. Rob Hubbard's title screen music is good, but it doesn't work so well when played throughout the game. Fair enough. So the actual review comments are a bit varied. But overall they enjoyed it and gave it a pretty good score. Moving on then, the next game I reviewed was Zolix, which I gave a score of 6.8, which is perhaps a little unfair because it's a much better game than a 6.8 score. It's just again influenced by those scores for graphics and sound, which are very basic in this game. The Lemon 64 score 7.5, so a little bit better than mine. Lots of people liked it, lots of comments there saying one of their favourite games back in the day. Good kicks clone, not much to look at with this one, but man, it's addictive. I'd agree with all those comments. So moving on to the ZZap score, they gave it a sizzler in issue 26, June 87. which means it got 90%. Again, if you look at the scores, the overall 90% doesn't reflect some of the scores individually, like presentation, very basic, graphics 35%, sound 29%, but it's the hookability, lastability and value scores that contribute probably most to that 90% score. Value 97%, well worth pawning your granny for. I'd hope you could pawn your granny for more than £2. So yeah, the review comments, I can't sleep at night, those little spots flying through my brain, rebounding off my skull and attempting to blow me up. It's hell. I think someone got a little bit carried away there. They've got they're saying they're a Zolixaholic. Julian Rignall said, there's one thing that's really bugging me. Why is it that a game that looks like a complete and utter pile of rubbish can be so hellishly addictive? The graphics are bland and repetitive beyond belief. The sound is simply an afterthought and there's nothing in the way of options or a title screen. But it's kicks and I love it. And the final comment there, full price games are certainly coming under a severe attack from the budget sector these days, and Zolix merely continues the trend. It is without doubt the most addictive game I've played for months, and I personally had to confiscate everyone else's joystick to give myself long enough to review the damn thing. Apart from limited variety between screens, I have no real reservations in recommending that you go straight out and buy this game. It's tremendous. So there you go. Pretty universally acclaimed reviews there of Zolix. So the next game I reviewed was Arcade Classics, which is a collection of 4 arcade games in one package, and I gave that a score of 7.5. The Lemon score, as you can see, is 6.6, so they didn't rate it quite as highly as I did from 48 votes. And someone there says music is better than the games. That's fairly true, and they love those psychedelic snakes. I'd agree with that. None of these old arcade games ever did much for me. A nice bundle though if you like the games on offer. So let's have a look at the ZZap review, and this is another one that they gave a good score to. They gave it a silver medal. They'd moved from sizzlers to silver medals by this point for budget games, and they gave it 90%. Great entertainment. Graphics fairly basic, but then so were the originals, which is a fair appraisal of the graphics. They did a good recreation of the original games, but they weren't that great. Great title screen and plenty of options. So just a couple of review comments here. There's masses and masses of playability contained in Arcade Classics, with each of the 4 games being a good blast in its own right. Add the 4 together and throw in a powerful soundtrack and you come up with one of the best budget releases in ages. And just a comment there that I'd agree with. The conversions aren't perfect, but they're still fun to play, and at 50p a throw they're certainly far from disastrous. It's a pity that Snakes and Space Wars are 2-player only, but if you can get hold of a friend then these are truly arcade classics. Yeah, so that was my criticism as well. The fact that Snake and Space Wars was 2-player only was a little bit of a letdown, and also Space Wars was a little bit buggy as well from my experience. But overall it was a pretty decent game. So now we move on to the games where you guys watching the videos help vote for which game I played, and the first of those was Ollie and Lisa, The Ghost of Shilmore Castle, which I gave a score of 4.9. Wasn't particularly impressed with it. Lemon score pretty similar, slightly higher, but still not a great score of 5.7. Comment here, one of the most frustrating games ever due to ridiculous difficulty, badly drawn sprites and monochrome background did it no favours either. So let's take a look at the ZZap score. It was 50%, you probably saw that there. Let's have a look at the review. It's another full pager, this time from March 1987, black and white. We've got a couple of screenshots there, which probably actually make it look more appealing in black and white than it does when you see them in colour. So they gave it 50% overall, nothing special, but there's enough fun to be had for £2. Can't really agree with that, even though my score is almost identical. Graphics and sound, they probably gave a better rating than I did to both of those, and presentation. Looks like they've given it high-ish ratings in nearly every category, but then still giving it an overall score of pretty much the same as what I did. So let's have a quick look at the reviewer comments. And that's Gary Penn there, says, I don't like this sort of platform game at all, jumping from platform to platform to platform to platform. I loathe it. I hate waiting for a nasty to pass before I can jump. All this crucial timing infuriates me and I despise the repetition. Ollie looks sickeningly cute and I found it more rewarding to let him die just to take the smile off his face. One of the other reviewers here says Ollie and Lisa is one of the most compelling and infuriating platform games I've seen in ages, and it's only £2. So there seems to be a bit of variation between some reviewers that hated it and some that actually quite liked it. I'd be siding with the ones that hated it pretty much. I didn't hate it, but it was massively frustrating and definitely could have been better with a few gameplay tweaks. So finally, for this set of comparisons, let's move on to the last game I reviewed, Fighter Pilot, which was of course a re-release of the digital integration game, and I gave this a score of 5.9. The Lemon score 6.5, so pretty similar. And let's just move on to the ZZap review, which gave it, it's a very small review, there's a massive bunch of Silverbird re-releases reviewed here, all on one page, so I'll be coming back to visit this in future review comparisons. They obviously didn't review the game first time around because I don't think ZZap was even around in 1984 when the game was originally released. So you can see there's no reviewer comments as such here, it's just a little blurb. They gave it 60%, which is very similar to my 5.9. Last comment there, as I said, it's a good simulation and as such one for simulation buffs only. The combat is wholly exciting, requiring you to spend ages sneaking up behind your foe and then riddling his bum with bullets. If he gets away first time, you're not likely to see him again before the end of the game. So yeah, not much of a detailed review there to compare with, but actually overall rating 60% compared to my 5.9 is pretty much identical. So just like the first one of my review comparison videos, the last thing to do here is to take a look at the different ratings all compared to each other. So I've got my scores on the left here, the ZZap scores in the middle, and the Lemon scores on the right hand side. And what's quite interesting to look at is nearly all the ZZap and Lemon scores are exactly the same in terms of ranking from 1 to 10 from this set of reviews. So you've got Thrust at the top, then Zolix. A little bit of a change there with Arcade Classics and Rock and Wrestle, but then you've got Warhawk, Fighter Pilot, Pneumatic Hammers is almost in the same place, and then the bottom three, Ollie and Lisa, UFO and Street Warriors, all in the same place as well. So Lemon and ZZap almost in complete agreement, but then when you come to my reviews, they're all over the place in comparison. So they're roughly in similar positions, I suppose, in that the likes of Zolix, Thrust and Warhawk are near the top, and the likes of Street Warriors, Ollie and Lisa and Pneumatic Hammers are quite near to the bottom. My UFO one is slap bang in the middle, which again, as I've already said, isn't really fair. It doesn't deserve that score, but that's the score it got due to my formula. And what this has made me realise is that the formula is flawed, because if you've got a game with really good graphics and sound but bad playability, it doesn't push the score down low enough, whereas if you've got poor graphics and sound and high playability, it doesn't actually push the score high enough. So what I should have done was made the playability rating worth 3 times more than the graphics and sound, and I think that would have given better scores. But it's too late now, I've done 20 reviews, so I'll have to stick with the formula that I've been using. Otherwise it's going to be difficult to compare them with each other when we get to the end. So it's only a score, it doesn't mean I definitely recommend or don't recommend the game anyway. So there you go. So I'm pretty happy with my listing, other than UFO being a little bit too high. I think everything else is roughly in the right place. Pneumatic Hammers was really dull. Ollie and Lisa was really frustrating. Street Warriors was pretty crap. Fighter Pilot was quite boring. So the bottom half of my table I'm happy with, and the top half I'm happy with as well. I'd probably put Zolix a bit higher, and possibly Thrust. I'd probably put those two over the top of Arcade Classics, but other than that it's pretty similar. But yeah, when you compare mine to the other two, it's all over the place comparatively. I don't think there's a single game I've got in the same place as either of the other two, which is very different to last time where they were all pretty similar, give or take a position or two. And just to round things off, let's once again look at the average scores across the 10 games, and again they're pretty similar like they were last time around for the first 10. I think if there'd been a score for Street Warriors by ZZap, it wouldn't have been a very good score. It probably would have been 30 to 40% at best, and that would have brought that average down. My average is 6.31, theirs is 6.6, and Lemon's is 6.49. So again, pretty similar. I think that's slightly higher than last time, although I'm just going on memory rather than actually knowing that for sure, so I could be completely wrong. They could have actually been higher last time around. But again, across the 3 different sets of reviews, mine, Zap and Lemon, all pretty similar. So there you go, that's another 10 games reviewed, 20 in total. I'll be moving on to game 21 in the very near future. Let me know what you thought of this video. I will carry on doing these after every 10 reviews, whether you like it or not, but I'd still like to know what you think. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you again soon with another game review. Bye for now.